Continuing our discussions on the changing shape of automotive retail, I'm here in Stuttgart with Dirk Adelmann, CEO of Smart Europe, and Andrea Sorrenti, Deputy CEO of MSX International. I want to talk about these non-traditional distribution models that are emerging. We touched upon them briefly some time back, but now is the time to get into them in a little more detail. So, Andrea, let me start with you this time. As a brand, as an OEM or an NSC, today there is a vast variety of alternatives available when it comes to getting product to consumers. As an NSC, what are some of the factors that one is looking at or considering when they make decisions around what sort of distribution model they choose?
I think the first factor is, what's the starting point? If you're a legacy manufacturer, obviously you already have probably a traditional dealership network. And that's an asset that you can lean on to expand your footprint also in when you're launching different products. So that's definitely one of the first elements that you want to consider. The second element is, what does your customer journey look like? So what do you expect based on your target consumer? What do you expect that experience to look like? And therefore, how is the weight of the various channels that you interact with your consumers through? And then you go into other elements that are connected to more of your own organization and how you can go to market more successfully. We've got examples of companies that decided to start with a direct-to-consumer and go only through direct-to-consumer. And I think, again, when you're looking at early adopters, that might be an approach that is successful. But when you expand to the mass market, is that going to continue to work in that same format? On the other hand, if I'm a traditional manufacturer and I've got all these dealers that have a strong local presence, they are already in the community, they understand how to operate within that community, I will want to leverage those. So I think there's no magic sauce here. I mean, you have to really look at your markets and try to evaluate the best options. And we've seen that across the industry. All manufacturers have chosen one or more of the various models that are available based on their product, based on the consumer, and based on the market.
So it's different strokes for different folks depending on your context, your priorities. Dirk, I'm very keen to know from you, in your world, when you started the business and you began leading it, what were some of the strategic choices you were faced with? How did you make that decision, and what sort of distribution model have you chosen to go with? Does it vary by market, or is it uniform across Europe?
We were exactly standing at that crossroads 5 years ago. Shall we relaunch completely new, or shall we base it on what we already have, our existing network over here? We were thinking full greenfield or what we call brownfield approach. So leaning on, in some areas like after sales service, on one of the mothers. So in this case, in Europe, on Mercedes-Benz. And there are huge advantages to go into a so-called hybrid model. So you use certain areas that are super established, successful, the customers like. You don't cut that away. But in some other areas, you need to be super innovative. We also discussed about why not piloting one market against the other market. Why try it here, try it there? That's in Europe very, very tricky because it's a very heterogeneous market, but it is a regulated market. So if you have that loophole of a, let's say, indirect sales model in one market where you in all the other markets control the direct sales, that won't work because you always have the option to export into all the other markets. So you have to decide either or start with a pilot and then have the intention to roll out across Europe. So from that perspective, there were a couple of ways open to us, and we decided to continue with the most performing retailers that we have in the network. So we did a clear network restructuring, but we kept the most performing ones with us. And then we based everything on an online journey and on direct sales. And we tried to integrate the offline partners as closely as possible. And we are still trying, because it's definitely not over once you launch it. We take the customer feedback, we take the retailer feedback, we take our NSC feedbacks, and then we improve. And this will be a long journey to get where we really wanted to be 5 years ago. Don't underestimate also the system landscape that is needed to be fully omni-channel.
So of course the systems landscape is one aspect of it, and Andrea, I would like you very much to add to this. This is such a huge change, even for a company like Smart that was basically starting from a clean slate with some strength behind them. But even for a typical manufacturer that has operated for a number of decades with a certain kind of distribution model, to make changes is such a huge endeavor. From your perspective, what are some aspects of this change or this transformation that you see that you would like to share with us?
So first of all, let's consider this. If you're a legacy manufacturer, your systems landscape that we were talking about has been built over the years, and it's not necessarily fully integrated. So you might have CRM systems that don't interact with your back-end systems, that don't interact with your dealer systems, and so on. And so the integration of those systems, again, when you're already operating at scale, is a huge endeavor. It's not something that you can do very easily. Whereas if you're a new company that's starting from scratch, that might be a slightly simpler endeavor. Don't want to oversimplify it because it's very complex anyway, but it's at least it's not a huge integration challenge. Systems play a key role, but there's other elements that come into the equation as well, and it's about process within your organization, and it's about culture as well. We were discussing earlier with Dirk about some of the characteristics of the traditional manufacturers. These are not consumer organizations. It's engineering organizations that are used to wholesale vehicles to dealers, right? And it's the dealer that typically does the last mile. And so transforming that mindset is definitely one of the biggest challenges of the industry. And then there's the administrative tasks that the OEMs are not even set up to do traditionally. So, how do you invoice these vehicles if you're selling directly to consumer, right? And think about the logistics and managing used cars and moving inventory between different locations. There's a lot of complexity in changing these models.
So transformation in and by itself is quite complex, but in a world like this is transformation across multiple dimensions at the same time. You're looking to completely change the culture and the way teams operate and think. You're changing the way you as the brand, what your business model looks like you said, going from wholesaling cars to now retailing cars and engaging with customers. And then there is a financial aspect to it as well, an operational aspect to it as well. So which makes it, I might say, a perfect storm of multiple, a cocktail of transformations.
And the financial aspect has become stronger in the last few, let's say, years and months with interest rates going up. The inventory that you have to hold as an OEM is a really expensive thing.
So, Dirk, in taking off on this endeavor, especially on the cultural side, how did you have to engage your teams and give us some insights on how you went around setting this up and creating that culture of retail and that culture of customer centricity within your organization?
I mean, we relaunched a business model. We relaunched a complete product lineup. So that was also new for Smart. We relaunched our complete organization, so the entire teams and the retail network. So that was, as you said, the perfect storm in a time, I think, 3 months prior to us going or starting the company, I should say, we had COVID. So then trying to basically ramp this up under COVID conditions for 2 years. So a really perfect storm. What helped was we started with 10 people. We had 10 hand-picked people. And then we tried to have a mix of different industries and different cultural backgrounds. We have now 45 nationalities in Stuttgart, which is rather difficult to attract in amongst our 300 colleagues. And on top of that, you have, or you should also consider that taking people from other industries, other cultural backgrounds, as such, is a huge transformation project. And then adding on top new business model, being a little bit the rebellious element within the industry, attracts a certain kind of people. So we had, I would say, 20% idealists from companies like Google, Zalando and Co. We had hardcore salespeople that joined it because they were fed up with the current model at their existing employer. So it was quite an explosive mix that we had in the beginning, but that helped. That helped a lot also to open your mind and to try things completely differently. And that advantage usually an OEM, an established OEM, doesn't have. So for us, it was much easier, to be fair. And yes, legacy systems, if you cut them, if you say at least on the CRM side, which is huge, and retailer integration into the CRM world, you do it differently, you do it from scratch, that obviously helps a lot. But not everybody can afford to do that because there are not years, there are decades of integration work and efforts and also money involved, and you don't just throw that away.
I'm sure you faced your challenges in this journey, but if I may put it this way, I think Smart's position was was one of a certain luxury that a number of companies can't afford, where you had the ability to work and operate like a startup when you needed to, very, very entrepreneurial, small team, driven individuals, diverse backgrounds, but at the same time have the luxury of relying on the financial and operational strength of two very, very large industry players. And I'm sure that helped as well in your journey.
It still helps. We are a very asset-light company, so we don't produce. We don't engineer, only to a certain extent. So we got a huge support from our Chinese parent. The distribution network we share in Europe with Mercedes-Benz. The design for the next couple of years is secured by Mercedes-Benz, so we don't have to run a huge design team, a huge engineering team, a huge production team. We supervise that, of course, and we still take the last decision, the final decision as Smart, as an independent OEM. But we have huge support. And the inventory is a topic. That's an asset you will have in any kind of direct system, with or without own retail. So that is, I would say, the biggest asset you still carry around, but the rest is super light. And that also helps, of course.
I'm going to ask you a slightly tricky, challenging question. Nowhere close to the sort of challenges you face transforming across multiple dimensions at once. But can you share with us 2 or 3 examples of some very unexpected learnings you had? Something you were not expecting at all, but suddenly popped up and there was an epiphany that said, oh, wow, didn't expect that.
I didn't expect our Chinese colleagues to be that fast. That speed is amazing. It helps. And I didn't expect that the collaboration on that level also works by now really seamlessly. So give you an example. If we are in Europe complaining that, for example, an attention assist is way too policeman-like, no? Chinese customers are okay with that. In Europe, we are not used to this. So please tune it down, give me my freedom, give me my space. It takes you maybe 1 or 2 weeks of discussions with the colleagues. But then once they understand, within the next over-the-air update, it's fixed. And I've never seen that speed anywhere in the industry. So that was a huge surprise to me, a huge surprise. And it helps. It really helps.
Andrea, again, from your perspective, and I want to move away from distribution models and start talking about formats as well. So, the traditional retail format, especially in the Western world, has been these large showrooms that often sit outside of city limits in areas where land is plentiful and cheap. But we've also seen some very new, interesting formats appear over the last few years. Some of them have been brand stores, city stores. In China, we see a lot of stores in malls, especially with the new brands. We've seen pop-up stores. Talk to us from your perspective. How do you see the space evolving? Which sort of formats do you see gaining more momentum? Where do you see things sort of trending downwards based on your experience and what you see around the world?
Yeah, I think the concept of having the large sales store with the service in the back is probably something that will not be as relevant in the future. If you think about the current dealer landscape, there's a lot of that, right? But actually the interaction is different. When you're in sales and in that sales environment, you wanna show your vehicle to your customers. And I think what's gonna be essential is also the test drive phase, which we've been preaching about for years, but it still is. And I think Dirk, you would agree with that. It's still a really important phase in the purchase process. So even if you're in a mall or a pop-up location, the ideal situation is to have a way to get the customer in the vehicle and to have them experience it, right? So I think that's where it's going to go. Service, I think, is going to change significantly, and we're seeing that in some locations in China. Some of these OEMs in China have actually created their own service environments where they take care of let's say, the more challenging repairs, anything that's related to batteries or more complex, whereas they leave the regular maintenance to the dealership, so something lighter, or they rely on mobile service as well. So I see that variety of environments continuing to expand, and so the isolated sales store and service that is a little less visible to the customer.
There's an unprecedented level of vibrancy, I think, in terms of formats, both on the sales and after sales side. And this is something we'll pick up a little bit later in the discussion.